바로 알리기. 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, December 3rd, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung praises the public for transforming, quote, the darkest moment into one of our brightest, not via violence but through dance and song, and pledges to designate December 3rd as a day for the people. And speaking to the foreign press after that statement to mark the first anniversary of South Korea's short-lived martial law, the president highlights the importance of seeking solidarity instead of taking sides in foreign policy. Meanwhile, a revised report by the central bank reveals the South Korean economy saw a strong expansion of 1.3% in the third quarter of this year, in a clear indication of steady momentum despite global headwinds.
자유 헌정 질서를 지키기 위해 비상 계엄을 선포합니다.
국민 여러분, 지금 국회로 와 주십시오.
계엄 해제 요구 결의안을 상정합니다. 가결되었음을 선포합니다.
싫어. 탄핵하라.
주문 피청구인 대통령 윤석열을 탄핵합니다.
대통령 이재명.
We begin at the presidential office in Yongsan, where President Lee Jae-myung shared a special statement earlier this morning to mark the solemn first anniversary of South Korea's short-lived martial law. Arirang's Yoon Jung-min starts our team coverage with the president's comments.
Exactly 1 year after the martial law declaration, President Lee Jae-myung praised the Korean people's peaceful efforts to block military rule while condemning the incident itself, calling both the attempted coup and the civic resistance unprecedented in a 21st century democracy.
역설적이게도 지난 12.3 쿠데타는 우리 국민들의 높은 주권의식과 대한민국 민주주의의 놀라운 회복력을 세계 만방에 알린 계기가 됐습니다.
President Lee on Wednesday issued a special statement, first anniversary of the Revolution of Light. He proposed designating December 3rd as a day of people's sovereignty and making it an official public holiday, expressing gratitude to citizens who stood unarmed against martial law forces and tanks on the night martial law was declared. He added that the Korean people fully deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for their actions.
온 세계에 민주주의의 위대함을 알린 공로로 노벨 평화상을 받는다면 갈등과 분열로 흔들리는 모든 국가들에게 크나큰 전환점이 될 것입니다.
With investigations and trials still underway, Lee reiterated his pledge to ensure that those involved are held accountable, saying they must be judged for attempting to undermine the constitutional order out of private greed and even plotting a war with a foreign entity.
다시는 쿠데타를 꿈조차 꿀 수 없는 나라, 누구도 국민 주권의 빛을 위협할 수 없는 나라를 만들기 위해서라도 정의로운 통합은 필수입니다.
When it comes to establishing a special tribunal to handle insurrection charges, now under discussion at the National Assembly, Lee said he believes lawmakers will make a wise decision. He gave a similar response when questioned about a possible extension of the special counsel probe. The message of democracy and the rule of law carried into a luncheon later in the day, as the president invited 5 key figures, including the National Assembly Speaker and the Supreme Court Chief Justice, to the presidential office. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung's special statement was followed by a press conference with members of the foreign media, during which he fielded questions largely on South Korea's interactions with its global partners. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says the most consequential outcome of his 2 summits with U.S. President Donald Trump was Washington's approval for Seoul to build nuclear-powered submarines.
동북아시아의 전략적 중요성, 우리 입장에서도 가질 수 있는 전략적 유연성, 자율성, 이런 측면에서 보면 매우 유용한 결과였다고 생각됩니다.
Speaking to members of the foreign press on Wednesday, President Lee again dismissed concerns that pursuing such vessels could undermine the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. He emphasized that South Korea remains fully committed to non-proliferation and that going nuclear would contradict its goal of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Another area of focus was Seoul's approach to relations with its neighbors. When asked about the escalating tensions between China and Japan, President Lee said taking sides would only make things worse.
한쪽 편을 들기보다는 모두가 함께 공존할 수 있는 길이 무엇인지를 찾도록 하고 또 가능한 영역이 있다면 우리로서도 갈등을 최소화하고 중재 조정할 수 있는 부분이 있다면 그 부분의 역할을 하는 게 더 바람직하겠다 이렇게 생각합니다.
Lee mentioned that he is willing to visit both China and Japan soon to hold talks with President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi to further strengthen bilateral cooperation with each country. Looking at Russia, President Lee acknowledged diplomatic difficulties, citing the war in Ukraine and Moscow's deepening ties with North Korea. Still, he said Seoul will continue efforts to keep communication channels open to improve relations.
대한민국도 러시아에 대한 제재에 참여하고 있습니다. 사실은 상당히 갑갑한 상태가 돼 있죠. 북러 관계가 우리 입장에서 매우 바람직하지 않은 상태로 진전되고 있는 건 사실이죠. 그렇다고 해서 포기할 수는 없습니다.
Regarding North Korea, the president expressed his willingness to formally apologize to the North over newly surfaced allegations that the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration sent leaflets to the North to heighten tension and thereby justify its martial law declaration, but added that he needed to be cautious as this could ignite ideological conflicts at home. As the year draws to a close, eyes are on how President Lee will navigate an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape in the new year and how he will continue advancing his pragmatic diplomacy centered on the national interest. 송유진, Arirang News.
The former administration's martial law declaration late at night on December 3rd was overturned within hours by lawmakers at the parliament. Our political correspondent An Sung-jin met up with a man who witnessed the events that took place at the National Assembly on that fateful night.
Kim Sun-young is a union member, and December 3rd, 2024 was just another day. Nothing different for him.
When we hold a sit-in here, except for weekends, we basically live here, eating and sleeping in a tent as we continue our protest.
He wrapped up his day around 10 p.m. and was ready to head to sleep when his colleague told him martial law had been declared. In disbelief, Kim was one of the first to witness the initial entry of martial law troops and the clash between the crowd gathered in front of the National Assembly and the police.
To be honest, I'm human too. I was scared and terrified, but as I sat there thinking, I realized this wasn't a moment to run. This was a moment to step out.
From students and teachers to war veterans, Kim said he met all kinds of people, among those who came to protest the martial law declaration. He set up speakers so they could give speeches and make announcements. Though he now no longer remains outside the National Assembly, the day still weighs heavily on his mind.
Back then, everything felt overwhelming, but the year passed so quickly. After watching everything for a year, it's just how incredible the Korean people are.
Former President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law at 10:29 p.m. on December 3rd, 2024, bringing thousands of citizens to the National Assembly demanding the lifting of the declaration. Lawmakers also gathered to pass a motion to cancel the martial law decree, though entrances were already blocked at around 11 p.m. In order to evade police patrol, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik climbed over this 1-meter-high wall, using it to access the entrance to the National Assembly and convene a plenary session. More than 200 armed martial law troops began entering the National Assembly grounds by helicopter and soon clashed with aides and staff inside the building, leading to physical confrontations. Shortly after 1 a.m., all 190 lawmakers present, out of the 300-member total, voted in favor of the motion, which meant that the majority approval enabled them to cancel the martial law decree.
I hereby declare that the resolution calling for the lifting of martial law has passed.
Following the vote, martial law troops began withdrawing from the National Assembly, and a little after 2 a.m., all personnel had pulled out. Former President Yoon then approved the motion to lift martial law in a cabinet meeting and publicly announced the end shortly before 6 a.m. on December 4th. During those 8 hours after martial law was declared until it was lifted, more than 10,000 people gathered, a powerful movement reviving South Koreans' resistance and fight for democracy. For many, the memories of that morning still cast a long shadow. But as the sun rises over the National Assembly, it reminds us that even after the darkest nights, there is still a sense of collective hope. Not only a reminder of what was lost, but what can be rebuilt. An Sung-jin, Arirang News. The martial law declaration in South Korea by the former administration initially raised questions about the state of the country's democracy. But 1 year on, quite a number of pundits say the event also served to show the strength of the country's civic engagement and its diplomatic resilience. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young spoke to one foreign scholar.
A year after the martial law crisis unsettled South Koreans and foreign observers, the country's diplomatic standing has been restored by democratic resilience and top-level diplomacy. That's according to former EU ambassador to South Korea, Michael Reiterer, who was in Seoul on the night the December 3rd decree was declared. He recalls the disbelief that swept through diplomatic circles as events unfolded.
I think I shared probably at the beginning the feeling with the international community that cannot be. This is not true. That was also the reaction of some Koreans around me at that evening.
Initial shock quickly evolved into deeper evaluation of what the crisis revealed. He cited warning signs within the previous administration and long-standing vulnerabilities in Korea's political architecture.
If you look at this night, probably without civil society and with parliamentarians jumping over the fence and a military not really engaging, the whole thing could have turned completely different. So how is it possible that this declaration could have happened?
Korea's democratic resilience, he noted, has long rested on the strength of its civic mobilization, which he observed over 2 presidential impeachment crises.
Well, I think the Korean history is actually a very strong argument because the engagement of civil society in Korea is probably stronger than in other countries. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. 2017, I have seen it. I have seen it last year when I was in Korea and when I saw demonstrations against President Yoon at the time. So I think the pressure from the street is a corrective.
But he warned that relying on the public alone to prevent such crises is insufficient. Reiter pointed to renewed discussions on constitutional reform to prevent a deadlock between the president and the executive.
And I think the lesson to be learned is that there should be something done about the presidential term, and perhaps also to make sure that the parliament and the president somehow are elected in parallel. Because one of the reasons for this coup efforts were the frustration that the president was blocked by the parliament.
Still, he noted that the world now sees Korea as having passed a significant stress test. At a time when Seoul is seeking a greater role in global affairs, from supply chain resilience to outreach to the global south, its swift return to high-level diplomacy after the crisis helped restore confidence abroad.
The international community, I think, has accepted now that Korea is back and back on track. We have seen that President Lee could host the APEC summit. He traveled to the United States. He stopped over in Tokyo. I think there is now a sound basis. And you also have a foreign minister now, Cho Yoon, who has a long experience as a diplomat, and I think he can certainly make sure that the ship remains on course, even if there are some waves on the ocean.
With Korea seeking greater influence from G7 level engagement to semiconductor supply chain leadership, Reiter stresses that foreign policy cannot be separated from internal cohesion.
The country has to unite and stay together because there are big challenges to meet. And if foreign policy starts at home, then you have to be consolidated at home. And I think, therefore, Korea would have an interest to have a more cooperative domestic environment in order to be stronger internationally.
1 year on, Korea's partners believe the country's democratic foundations remain intact, but its foreign policy role will grow only as steadily as the institutions that support it. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The South Korean military, meanwhile, came under fire on the night of December 3rd last year. And in this following report, our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung takes a look at the efforts underway to regain public trust.
Public trust in the military collapsed once again after former President Yoon Suk-yeol used the armed forces as a political tool in declaring martial law. Because of South Korea's painful history of military rule, the armed forces have long been working to rebuild public confidence. So it came as a major setback for the military to see that trust crumble again. Amid this fallout, many junior officers have been leaving the service. In the first half of this year alone, a total of 2,869 Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps officers applied for voluntary early discharge, the highest number ever recorded.
Even before the martial law incident, young officers were already leaving because military life was simply too difficult. Constant relocations, frontline duties, limited personal time, low pay, and increasing workloads. It took 20 to 30 years after the military dictatorship era for the armed forces to rebuild themselves as a people's military. But then martial law happened, delivering a major blow to soldiers' sense of pride.
To erase the traces of martial law, President Lee Jae-myung appointed a 5-term lawmaker as defense minister, making him the first civilian defense chief in 64 years. He then carried out a major personnel shakeup in September, replacing all 7-star general posts. 2 months later, another large-scale reshuffle of general-grade officers was announced, with 20 of 31 major generals promoted to lieutenant general. Professor Kim, Korea National Defense University, says that while it is necessary to punish those directly involved in the martial law declaration, it is also important to ensure stability and transparency in personal appointments.
Everyone agrees that the small number of people clearly involved in the martial law attempt should be punished. But if the military suddenly changes the balance of people from certain backgrounds or rushes to put people into roles they're not suited for, it becomes very hard for others to accept those decisions.
To prevent the military from becoming involved in unlawful orders again, the Defense Ministry has backed a bill that would give service members the right to refuse them. In fact, several officers have already been promoted for refusing to carry out orders related to the martial law attempt. Given that strict obedience to superiors is central to military culture, the legal revision and these promotions have raised concerns both inside and outside the armed forces. Some experts argue that if a disobedience clause is to be introduced, there should at least be a clear distinction between wartime and peacetime. Discussions continue to ensure the military never again becomes a tool of politics. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
A revised report by the central bank reveals the South Korean economy saw a stronger expansion of 1.3% in the third quarter of this year, in a clear indication of steady momentum despite external risk factors. Our economics correspondent Park Jun-han has the latest.
According to the Bank of Korea on Wednesday, South Korea recorded its strongest quarter-on-quarter GDP growth in 3 years and 9 months in the third quarter, expanding by 1.3%. This is the highest quarterly growth since the fourth quarter of 2021, when the country's GDP rose by 1.6%. The figure was revised up from the previous estimate of 1.2%, thanks to stronger than expected domestic demand and net exports.
The contribution of domestic demand to growth expanded significantly in the third quarter. Private consumption also made a much larger positive contribution, while government consumption remained at the same level as the previous quarter.
South Korea's growth rate came in at 1.2% in the first quarter of 2024, but fell sharply, contracting 0.2% for the second quarter. It then inched up to 0.1% in both the third and fourth quarters, before slipping back to minus 0.2% in the first quarter of 2025. The country's economy rebounded to 0.7% in the second quarter and continued its strong upward momentum into the third quarter. The Bank of Korea said that if the fourth quarter GDP stays above zero growth from the third quarter, achieving an annual growth rate of 1.1%, which is higher than the original 1% projection, is still plausible.
If fourth quarter growth comes in between minus 0.4% and minus 0.1%, the economy can still achieve 1% annual growth. And if growth stays at zero or above, an annual rate of 1.1% is also mathematically possible.
Despite the strong GDP growth, the income that actually flows into Korean households and businesses didn't rise as much. Real gross national income rose 0.8%, but nominal gross national income slipped 0.3%, as Korea earned less for its exports while paying for more imports, reducing the purchasing power of each export dollar. 박준환, Arirang News.
And the National Assembly late Tuesday voted in support of the government-proposed budget of some 728 trillion won for next year. Our Ising-jae covers that vote.
The National Assembly has approved next year's budget, totaling 727.9 trillion won, or about $498 billion US. Lawmakers passed a plan just minutes before the legal deadline on Tuesday night, ending weeks of tense negotiations and delivering the first on-time budget in 5 years. The breakthrough came earlier in the day when the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party reached a last-minute compromise. Both sides agreed to maintain the government's proposed overall spending level, a key demand of the administration, and preserve several of President Lee Jae-myung's signature programs. Those programs include the nationwide local gift certificate initiative, which the opposition had previously argued should be scaled back. Under the final agreement, the parties decided to reduce $2.9 billion from a mix of artificial intelligence programs, policy funds, and several other categories. That money will not be cut from the budget entirely. Instead, the same amount will be reallocated to priority areas that both parties agreed require urgent support. Those areas include measures to strengthen the country's disaster recovery system following the massive fire at a state-operated data center earlier this year. The budget will also direct additional funding toward expanding the distributed power grid industry, which the government says will improve energy stability and technological competitiveness. National scholarships will also receive an increase to help families struggling with tuition costs during a period of slow economic recovery. In the end, both sides chose compromise over a continued stalemate. While keeping the overall spending level intact while adjusting internal allocations, the parties managed to meet the constitutional deadline for the first time since 2021. Lawmakers from both parties said the agreement was difficult but necessary to prevent funding disruptions for key public services. With the budget now approved, ministries will begin preparing detailed spending plans for 2026. The government says the new budget will prioritize economic support, national defense, and faster recovery from recent disasters while maintaining stability in state finances. 이승재, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's foreign reserves rose for the 6th month in a row in November, reaching a 3-year high of over $430 billion US. According to the Bank of Korea today, the rise was driven by higher investment returns and an increase in foreign currency deposits held by local financial institutions. Holdings of securities, including government and corporate bonds, grew by nearly $1.4 billion US. Now, as of the end of October, South Korea was the 9th largest holder of foreign reserves worldwide. A South Korean diplomat has reaffirmed the government's commitment to the safety of its skilled workers in the U.S., calling on the Trump administration to ensure that ICE raids like the one on the Hyundai plant in Georgia back in September is not repeated. In an interview with an American daily published on Tuesday, Lee Sung-hwan, Director General for Foreign Strategy and Planning at Seoul's Foreign Ministry, also pointed out that Korean engineers and technicians should be treated as valuable contributors who are in the U.S. temporarily to share their expertise. He was part of a South Korean diplomatic delegation to Georgia to restore bilateral trust.
A strong cold spell came down from the north, bringing a bitter cold to the whole country. Center areas had sub-zero temperatures all day. As a result, cold wave advisories are in effect in central regions, northern parts of Gyeongsangbuk-do province. In addition, heavy snow is forecast for West Coast areas. Heavy snow advisories have been issued on the west coast of Chungcheongnam-do Province, the Jeollado provinces, and mountainous areas of Jeju Island. By tomorrow morning, the west coast regions and the mountainous areas of Jeju Island will receive up to 10 centimeters of snow. The cold spell will continue tomorrow morning nationwide, with Seoul at -9 degrees and Chuncheon at -14 degrees. Daily highs will rise not too much, getting up to 3 degrees in Seoul, 6 degrees in Gwangju and Daegu. The first snow of the season is possible in Seoul tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
Korea, a globally recognized sports powerhouse. Behind the dazzling achievements, there's always an invisible force at work. With sophisticated materials, cutting-edge equipment, and innovative technological solutions, SMEs in the K-sports industry play a vital role in bolstering Korea's status as a sports powerhouse. By integrating AI technology, they unlock athletes' potential and enhance performance, elevating the sports environment to the next level and opening new markets in the sports industry. Their innovative technology and bold challenges drive the growth of Korea's sports industry, creating a better world through sports. The innovation of these SMEs never stops. A systematic partnership support program is implemented to discover promising sports SMEs, provide technical validation and R&D support to enhance competitiveness, and strengthen the foundation for overseas expansion. At Tokyo Sportech 2025, the technological prowess of Korean companies was recognized. The Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, and the Korea Sports Promotion Foundation supported K-sports companies with product promotion and business consultations with global buyers, demonstrating product quality and market potential, and confirming the possibility of expanding into the global market.
저희는 ICT 강국으로서 바이어나 사용자들한테 신기술을 접목한 생활 스포츠 기회를 실질적으로 확대할 수 있는 그 기회를 제공하는데 많은 도움이 될 수 있으리라고 확신을 합니다.
이제 스포츠도 K죠. K 스포츠는 이겁니다.
The joy for all, created by the power of K-sports. Experience the future of the new sports industry through the innovation and technology of the Korean sports industry.
우린 알 수 있어.
Today, South Korea marks precisely 1 year since its short-lived martial law declared by the former administration on December 3rd, 2024. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Wednesday, December 3rd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. President Lee Jae-myung praised the public for transforming, quote, the darkest moment into one of our brightest, not via violence, but through dance and song. This particular praise came during a special statement earlier this morning to mark the first anniversary of South Korea's short-lived martial law in over 4 decades. For more on this, our freelance journalist Yang Chen-hao here in the studio. Chen-hao, it's been a long time. Welcome back.
Hello, long time no see. Glad to be back here.
Right. I also have Stephen Boruk with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia. Stephen, it's great to have you here.
Good to see you as always.
Chen-hao, let's begin then with details of the special statement by President Lee Jae-myung earlier on this Wednesday morning.
So President Lee Jae-myung has spoken a lot today, but let me explain it to you briefly. He has regarded the citizens' protest as a way of defeating an unjust power through peaceful means. And he even mentioned that South Korean people have made themselves fully deserving the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said the government born from the Revolution of Light will designate it December 3rd as National Sovereignty Day to honor the great courage and actions of the South Korean people. And during the foreign press conference, there is a journalist, I remember it's from ABC from the United States, asking President Lee, recently we always like to put a K to specify or to show the difference of Koreans are doing K-pop, K-drama, K-beauty, and K-democracy was also being mentioned too. So she's asking President Lee, how will the president define the K-democracy? And President Lee replied that he does think that the K-democracy is very special, and he believes that this is an example of citizens expressing their demands collectively and ultimately realizing them peacefully. And he said that in the past, when we talk about collective action, people often associate it with arson, with destruction of buildings or institutions or actings of violence. However, South Korea, as we see, this country has avoided such unfortunate incidents, and instead they go onto the street and to demonstrate using the most direct means, direct ways to peacefully pursue their demands. Thus, he said it is a form of direct democracy.
Right, and staying with the press conference with members of the foreign media, Stephen, you were there, of course. Before I ask you about your takeaways from that particular conference, what appears to have been the common factor, if you will, with regard to the questions extended to the president by the foreign media today? And what consistent message did the president seek to relay, do you think?
First, to answer the bit about the questions, I mean, I'm not sure there really was a common thread, just because you do get a sense of the diversity and the different interests in the Foreign Press Corps when they get the chance to ask questions. And let me just say that this is like a quite unusual opportunity in that this was a press conference that was exclusively for the foreign press conferences. There were domestic reporters were not there, so it was like a smaller number of people who were there and more opportunities to ask things. So. Just what I meant about the regional proclivities is, you know, the Japanese reporters will get up and they'll ask something about Korea-Japan relations, and then somebody from an American media outlet will get up and they will ask, their question is always something about Trump. And then, you know, maybe somebody from, you know, it's quite clear like what those people's editors are interested in, and, you know, what their idea of like what their audiences are interested in. But in terms of like the kind of through line for what Lee was trying to communicate, I mean, I think Chen-hao got into a lot of this, and Sunny, you and some of in your intro, just that this was a quite scary and a quite ominous moment that we went through 1 year ago today. But Lee was really trying to drive home the message that this had a kind of positive legacy. And probably because he was speaking to an audience of foreign journalists, he was really trying to hammer home the idea that like this is something that could be a model for other parts of the world. You know, he at one point in Lee's remarks, he kind of addressed people in other countries, and he said like to the people in the world who are fighting in their own societies for democratic freedoms, like he encourages them to look to the example of Korea, which he thought was outstanding in a number of ways. And specifically what he said was that the Korean people, through their resistance to the martial law decision, were able to go through legal channels and were able to use popular pressure in a peaceful and a non-violent way. He's right about that, and like that's a great story, but I just think that in trying to kind of push this as a model for other countries to follow, I would just say that there are some challenges there, because Korea has the advantage of that it already is a democracy. It already has all the functioning institutions that a democracy has. It has a free press. It has a free legislature. It has like independent investigative agencies and all the rest. So Korea was a case 1 year ago today of a functioning democracy that had a kind of rogue and a poorly conceived attempt to overturn it and to suspend the functioning of all those institutions. And as we saw, it didn't go very well because, the way that a democracy is supposed to work is that like one person or a very small number of people cannot suspend the functioning of the society. You know, power is dispersed and you have competing institutions that have checks and balances on each other. That's not the case everywhere. A lot of countries in the world where citizens are fighting for deeper and more meaningful rights, they are not operating in that kind of context. They do not have a free press. They do not have a kind of police force that will exercise the restraint in dealing with somebody who's protesting or somebody who's like openly showing dissent. So, I mean, I think Lee is sending a helpful message. He's sending a message of hope, a message of kind of solidarity with other places in the world. But we'll see if K-democracy ends up being the next hot South Korean export, as beauty and dramas and music have done.
Right, and staying with that then, Shin-ha, what were some of your takeaways from the president's exchange with the foreign press earlier this morning?
I remember this summer on this show, I've mentioned that comparing with former President Yoon Suk-yeol, President Lee has shown much more sincerity in engaging with both domestic and foreign international media. Today, in addition to a press conference for local journalists, he also held a separate briefing for foreign correspondents, which me and Stephen have attended, responding to each question in turn. In the past, when he was elected as the governor of Gyeonggi province, as I remember, I saw the live broadcast on TV. And South Korean anchorwoman raised a question about the corruption allegation against him. And during the live broadcast, Lee abruptly said that he couldn't hear the question, and he angrily took off his earphone and then ended the connection. As far as I know, he even told the reporter on the spot, saying that he didn't want to answer any related questions. But now we can see he has a clear change. And now President Lee is willing to take questions from both domestic and foreign correspondents, responding in a more friendlier and humorous manner without showing impatience. In fact, with just 6 months of taking office, he has already held over 3 press conferences for foreign journalists, as this is fairly frequent occurrence. But I still want to point out some problem that remains, there remains a difference in the way that which foreign and domestic reporters are treated. For example, in the recent APEC summit in Gyeongju, the presidential office initially provided workspace and nominating seats for those domestic media correspondents, leaving foreign presidential correspondents without any designated area. And after repeated requests from the reporters, they eventually opened a new space for foreign press. But there were any power outlets at the seats, making it almost impossible for us to work. And there have also been cases where the presidential office informed the domestic reporters in advance about upcoming briefings and events by government officials, but completely left out the foreign press groups. This kind of I can say this discrimination makes us feel excluded, and it's something that needs to be improved in the future.
But the event today perhaps it was more inclusive then.
Right.
Because there was a separate press conference with the foreign media. Right, something to think about, of course. Stephen, let's now touch upon the broader ripple effects of this country's short-lived martial law. What do you suppose has been the political repercussions of that event last year on December 3rd?
That's a big question, and it's probably something I could talk for a long time about. So feel free to tell me to be quiet if I'm going on too long. But I say there's different takes on that, and I think I lean towards the more optimistic side of things. I've been reading about this today and in recent days, and there's one take on this that this is a friend of mine, Arirang, published a column about this in the pages of Nikkei Asia. And part of her argument was, I hope I'm summarizing it correctly, was the martial law attempt and everything that connected with that is a kind of demonstration of the fragility of South Korean democracy, because it highlights how there are these competing networks in South Korean society and in the politics and in business and the investigative organs that are kind of inherently antagonistic and are competing for power and tend not to cooperate. And so it's, this kind of, the martial law attempt shows that the system can be disrupted at any moment, and the system is, has these, despite the kind of happy ending of the particular martial law case, the system has these flaws in it. And that's one way of looking at it, but I think if I was speaking as an analyst and not as a reporter, I think what I would say was, the precedent of the case is that this type of attempt to subvert democracy does not work, and it backfires very significantly. So if you look at what happened to Yoon, it was he tried to defy the democratic norms of the society, and he tried to, in a way that contravened law and contravened procedure and contravened norms, he tried to damage the democratic fabric of the country quite seriously, and it all blew up in his face. And it ended his term as president, and it looks like he will perhaps even lose his freedom for a very long time because of that. So I think I take the view that it shows that South Korean democracy has matured, because it proves that this is not a country where a number of brave but ill-intentioned people can execute a coup. It didn't work. And it was put down, and it was resisted using peaceful means and by working within the system. So I hope that the young people of this country, the people for whom this was kind of their first exposure to a big political conflagration like this. Their parents have seen this, their grandparents have all seen this, but for anybody who's younger than maybe my age or Chen Hao's age, anybody younger than that had never lived through something like this themselves. So I hope that the lesson that they take from this is that this kind of era, this kind of violent or volatile era of South Korean politics is in the past, because the country has just kind of outgrown that. We are here 1 year later on December 3rd of this year, and we are living in what is still a functioning democracy, what is still a society where citizens enjoy full civil and political rights. And we got here by a safe and a fair and a free election that took place in June of this year. So, like I said, I'm a bit more optimistic than most, and I think the repercussions, we're not out of the woods. There's still this trial that's dragging on, and South Korea does still have a political culture that is characterized by antagonism, and that does lead to administrative log jams, and it does lead to a kind of failure to address bread and butter political issues like housing and education and infrastructure and all the rest. But the lesson that I take from the events 1 year ago today is one of triumph over an ill-intentioned actor.
Right. Well, quite a number of pundits also said the particular event also further deepened the divide within the political arena. That being said, Chen Hao, what can you tell us about the impact on society itself?
I've both cover the Park Geun-hye scandal in 2016 and the President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law crisis last year. And I found there are very similar part when you doing interview on the street. They are very similar public mood. Many people, they told me that they felt ashamed for their president's actions and they feel regretted having voted for them. Recently, a well-known South Korean legal professor, Han In-seop from Seoul National University, he published a new book in Taiwan discussing this latest martial law crisis, and I have just written a review of the book today. What left a deep impression on me was that Professor Han's response to this kind of shame feeling by many Korean voters and citizens. President Han wrote that any country can produce a power-hungry, irrational leader like President Yoon Suk-yeol, but we should think about which country can return to normal in just 2.5 hours. In such a great crisis, South Korea has managed to avoid the use of guns, relying instead on citizens rushing to the scene in light clothing, and members of the National Assembly, they literally risking their lives to climb over the wall and participate in the vote to lift the martial law, and thereby blocking the presidential's decree within 2.5 hours, while people continue to take this go on the streets and having protest day by day in peaceful demonstration without any casualties. South Korea has seen for the second time citizens, the people using their collective power, as I mentioned, to directly pressure the National Assembly and then the Constitutional Court to remove an unfit president from office. And of course, voters must carefully scrutinize whether candidates are truly qualified before casting their ballots. But Korean citizens have shown that once a president exposes serious problems, acts dishonestly, and fails to persuade the public to accept his explanations, there are democratic mechanisms and civic pressure capable of forcing that president to step down, to leave the office.
Which is something Stephen was mentioning as well. And Stephen, as you mentioned, the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration, it's facing legal consequences for its declaration of martial law last year. What's the latest on that front?
Well, there's a lot going on there. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if I can break down all the specific cases, but I believe that the most serious charge that Yoon is facing is that of insurrection, and that means like leading an attempt to overtake the country. I believe that carries the potential quite significant penalty of perhaps life in prison. And I know that they're in the halls of the National Assembly and in the political circles nowadays, there's a lot of wrangling over the charges faced by some of the more high-profile members of the Yoon administration, such as former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and former People Power Party floor leader Chu Kyung-ho. I know that the government the Democratic Party, the ruling party, is kind of going after them as key accomplices, whereas the People Power Party is kind of objecting to this, and they're calling this a witch hunt. It's the old story of one Korean administration takes power and they do everything they can to mete out the harshest possible punishments to the people who came before them for whatever they did. This is a kind of exceptional case because this is an administration that the Yoon administration ended because of this whole martial law case. And Lee, had some pretty strong words on these topics earlier today. He did say that he wants to create a country where he wants to punish the people who are responsible for this as strongly as possible, and he wants to create a country where nobody would even dream of calling martial law. There's different ways to interpret that. You could say that that's just like a fair and a just kind of response to what took place. You could also say that that kind of feeds into this retributive culture that a lot of people in the country are a little bit fatigued by. I think I remember seeing a poll earlier this year where a plurality of respondents refer to political conflict as the biggest problem in society. The fact that these two political parties are always at each other's throats and they're not working together as much as they could. So. This is in the legal system now. This will be up to the Yoon's fate, and the fate of those closest to him will be up to legal professionals to decide. But We just have to hope that it doesn't lead to, or it doesn't worsen this kind of culture of these cycles of antagonism.
Right, of course, of course. Chen Hao, I believe we have time for just one more question. Could you remind us a bit about the events that unfolded on the night of December 3rd, 2024, during which I believe you were also on the ground covering that particular story?
We still have enough time? Yeah.
We have like about a minute left.
Okay, that was when I remember I just took a bath and I was doing hair drying, and I saw like on Facebook someone mentioned that President Yoon has declared martial law, and in the beginning I thought it was the fake news. Yeah, so I was like laughing, but later I turned on the television. All the terrestrial channels are suspended their shows, and they're having the breaking news broadcasting President Yoon's declaration. And then I remember that Kelly Kesselis from Washington Post called me, Chen Hao, should we go to the National Assembly together? And I said, why not? But I'm afraid because for Taiwan, as a Taiwanese, we have been experienced like martial law. Although after I was born, it's been lifted, but I still feel very worried if we, like, for example, if we take taxi and then if like police or the special forces block us, if they're gonna beat us, how could that be? What will we do? But later we didn't care about that much, because seeing that people are still like pouring in front of the National Assembly and having protests, so we decided to like taking taxi there. And then after we arrived, the National Assembly has already finished the vote lifting the martial law. People, they are already having like their banners and their posters. And then I was lucky enough to go inside the National Assembly during that night, though that the special forces are all withdrawn. So people, like many like MPs, they are announcing that they are claiming that President Yoon's insurrection and it needs to be kicked out. So, and that has been the starting of my life of covering the news day by day, like without sleeping. And then we see that president is being impeached and then being arrested. Yeah, lasting 6 months. Yeah, what a long period.
The political fallout was quite rapid.
Right.
Right, indeed. I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but that was a year ago. We are back. We have proven that Korea's democracy is resilient, if I may say so myself. All right, Chen Hao, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. Stephen, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that is all the time we have today. We return same time tomorrow with more panel discussion. Join us then.